Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to this week's journal for all seasons. This week I want to do something which is kind of a clue to this month's prompt for the coverlet of comfort. I'm not going to say what the coverlet of comfort is because that's going to be Wednesday's video, but I'm going to do something here with paper that if you watch Wednesday's video you'll see a connection. Sorry, that's a bit cryptic. I'm going to work just on this page. I think from here on out I'm going to just work on the facing page because this other side of my journal is getting so big and the gutter's getting so deep that working across it has just become unpleasant. The last few times I've worked only on one side or on two sides independently. So I don't like this artist canvas, which I did the collage on last week. I don't like it to write on, and I want to do some writing later. So I'm just going to work on this page, which is just thin copy paper. So I'm going to clip it down so it lays flat. But before I do that, I thought maybe I will go through my collage box with you a little bit. Maybe not the whole process, but what I'm going to do is I want some squares, all roughly the same size of paper, to make a collage like a grid, but one square per grid. So I'm just going to go through and pull out anything that's a bit big that shouldn't really be in there. That's me probably being lazy. I'm not putting it back in its folder. So any smaller bits that, you know, I'm not really worried about the colours. I think I do want actual paper and not tissue. That's probably a bit too small. Obviously all the greens are coming out the top that I used last week, but this, some people have asked me recently about how I store my stuff. This is my smaller bits of paper, and actually I'm going to sort out some of these bigger bits while I'm about it. So I have this shoebox, and that is all. That's all I keep of the little bits. And when it gets too full, I'll just go through and I'll pull out anything that is not, you know, very precious. Like, you know, just random bits of packaging paper or stuff like that. These bigger bits I have in file folders. I'll show you one. Can't show you the whole thing because they're in a basket, but these kinds of things, you know, these cardboard file folders. So this is labelled monochrome, so in here I'll have monochrome, and I've got about 8 or 10 of those maybe, and they all live in a basket that's the size for them to stand up in, and that's all I keep. I don't keep any more than that. Other than sketchbooks and plain paper, and I don't want any more than that because it's overwhelming and it's too much for me. You know, you might be different, and I just can't work with more stuff than that. I'm not really into having all the things. I'm into having the right things for me, like that. I'm going to put in the recycling. So yeah, I mean, that's just me. I've talked about it in relation to cloth, about being overwhelmed by too much stuff. But it is something I think to bear in mind if you yourself are feeling overwhelmed. Now I'm trying to get these larger pieces out to go. I do have a folder that's labelled jelly prints for these bigger pieces. And I might even, for example, just tear part of that off, put that bigger piece back where it belongs, and you know, put that in the big folder, the folder with the bigger pieces. You have whatever system you have, you know, whatever works for you. I'm just, because I had a couple of questions, and that's a bit of packaging, but it's got writing, Japanese writing on it, I think, so that's why I've kept that. Oh, those are, oh, I've got those. Those are some little squares that somebody sent me. Let's have a look at those. and I didn't have a place for them, so I've put them in here. Yeah, they're nice, but they're on card, and I think they'll come in for something else, not for this. But they're just little pieces of card that have been painted. I think I just want thinner papers for today. I'll put them back in their bag, keep them in here. So yeah, so I'm just going to go on and get some bits. This is about, that shouldn't be in here. I've got some, that's a napkin. I've got a few, I've got one drawer which houses this box and book pages from when I've taken books apart to you know, make journals with them, and my eco print papers, one large drawer in the dresser over there, and then I've got a box under here with those file folders in. And in terms of my journal making stuff, that's it. That's all I've got. That's all I keep. Apart from, like I said, I've got a few sketchbooks of plain paper and things like that. But I'm not saying that's the only way to do it. I'm just telling you that's how I do it because some of you asked. So, you know, if this really started getting over full, then I might take out, I mean, that's just some tracing paper. I might put that in the recycling, for example. I'm all for not throwing things away, but not to the point where you get overwhelmed with stuff. And all these, I mean, I save these edges of pages of book page because they're good for stamping words on, but you can only use so many in your lifetime. So, you know, that's just a bit of envelope, I think, that came out of the recycling anyway. So if this box starts getting overflowing, that's the kind of thing that I might consign to the recycling. But yeah, I've had the impression sometimes that people have felt a bit sorry for me that I didn't have a lot of stuff. Please don't. Please don't feel sorry for me. And people obviously also often kindly offered to send me things. And sometimes I accept that offer, but other times I might very gratefully decline and ask you to, you know, if you have stuff that you want to pass on, to try and pass it on somewhere locally. Just because I don't, yeah, I have a tiny home and I don't need any more stuff, and I do find it overwhelming. So yeah, I mean, please don't be offended if you have sent me stuff. If I've shared my address with you, then obviously I've been happy to receive whatever it is you've sent, but if I've ever refused you, I hope you haven't been offended. So I don't even know if that's enough that I've got out. Let's just call that enough, I think. We'll call that enough. We can always go back in for more. Maybe that's a bit of eco print, maybe a bit of that. So I'm going to put those larger pieces to one side to put back in my folder. I'm going to put these larger pieces of tissue paper, only the bigger bits, these bits back in my tissue paper box in that aforementioned drawer, and then I'm going to keep, I'll just tear a bit more of that gold off so it's a reasonable piece. And then, so this box, I like it to stay so I can close it, and it's just a shoebox. And that's all my collage papers apart from the bigger bits, like I said. And I won't, if I go to my friend's, for example, which is where I do most of my jelly printing type activities, because she's got a big studio, I won't go and produce a load of new papers unless I know that I need them. And again, this is only me. I don't want anybody to feel judged or, you know, anything like that. So I've got this pile, and all I'm going to do, I've got the blunty scissors. I'm going to cut squares about 1.5 inches, roughly. I'm not measuring. I don't know why I chose 1.5 inches, it just seemed like a good size. I don't mind if they're not all the same size. And if they're raggedy like that, partly, that piece I'll keep, that can go back in the box. The other tiny piece can go in the recycling. I sometimes feel that I'm telling you not to throw things away all the time, or it comes across like that. So I just wanted to kind of clarify really that I do sometimes throw things away. Or, you know, ideally put them to be recycled. Not everything can be recycled, of course. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut some squares out of this pile of papers, or roughly squares, one from each, and see how many I get, and then once I've done that, I'll be back to you for the next bit. Okay, so that's my little pile of squares. I think that'll be enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick them on here randomly, using my little glue stick in a kind of grid formation. And I want to leave space in between because I want to do some stream of consciousness type writing. So I'm going to start with the 4 corners, I think, and then I can get some kind of spacing going on. Oh, this glue stick's gone all funny. I'll persevere and see if it's going to work. Sorry if my head comes in. Even when it's random, I do like it to be somewhat lined up. Could of course, or I could of course have painted the background somehow first, because it is a bit white paper. I did think about it, but I just decided to go with it. Keep it simple today. Just felt like keeping it simple. So there I've got my 4 corners. I mean, obviously you can start anywhere and do it any way you like. I just put that one kind of halfway that gap. And this one halfway this gap. So it's a little bit like a very, very simplified version of the grid journaling, only instead of, you know, drawing and painting onto the paper, I'm using pre-decorated papers. If you don't have these kinds of pre-decorated papers, you could either make some just by painting onto scrap paper, or mark making, or printing, or stamping, or whatever, or you could just use magazine pages. I'm going to get one in between each, like that. Yeah, I think that's going to work okay. You know, anything really, packaging paper, whatever. I guess you could even just do all the same paper and make a grid. That's the same as that, so I'm going to put that somewhere else. You know, you could just have one piece of paper and cut it into squares and kind of explode it and leave gaps in between. That also might look kind of cool. If you took an image from a magazine or, you know, an old book or something and cut it into squares and exploded it, you know what I mean? So you've got space in between. That would be quite cool because you'd see the image, but with the spaces. Maybe I'll do that in the subsequent week. So it's very, very basic, but yeah, it's just really for the process. Like I said, it does. I did think about doing it next week after I'd done the Coverlet of Comfort video, but I didn't. I wanted to do it this week, so. Let's just little fragments of larger things. In other words, little squares cut from bigger pieces of paper in this case. Just all coming together. Whoops. Whoopsie whoopsie. To make a bigger picture. Sorry, that was a long pause in the middle of that sentence. One more bit. There we go. So that's it for the sticking. I should put that rather manky glue stick away. I can get rid of that bit of greaseproof. I can put all those little scraps back in the box and close it. Right. So now I'm going to get my just dropped that on the floor. I'll pick it up in a minute. Luckily most of it did fly open. Most of it landed on the lid. Sorry, where's my gel pen? I'm going to get my black gel pen because I like to write with it. It's a Uniball Air. I like to write with that because the ink flows nicely. And I'm going to do this off camera and then come back to you because I need to get my head in there. But I'm going to, well, you'll see what I've done. I'm going to write in the spaces in this direction, just whatever comes into my head. And then once I've written in that direction, I'm going to turn and write in that direction. But I'm not going to leave spaces between the words. I'm going to make the shapes of the words as I write, as I've done in the past, but so that it's illegible. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and when I've done that, I'll be back to you. So there we have it, short and sweet this week. So what I did, I'm not going to tell you exactly what I wrote, but I've got something on my mind, something that's making me a little bit anxious. Not a big thing, but just a little thing. So I wrote about that, whatever came into my head, this way, across here, just making the movements of the words. It's hardly writing, excuse me, it's hardly writing really, but thinking the words as I make the motions with the pen, if that makes sense. And when I'd done that way, I kind of ran dry. Like I said, it's only a little thing. That was enough to express that anxiety. So I turned my journal through 90 degrees, and then I wrote, I'll just check that it's in the right place. And then I wrote the words to Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, which is my reassurance poem, if that's a thing. It's what I recite to myself if I'm anxious, it's what I recite to myself if I can't sleep. So I know it by heart, so I just wrote, you know, you don't have to be good all the way through to finding your place and announcing your place in the family of things. And that, by just pure chance, fitted perfectly down to here, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things, and it left one line blank, so I wrote again over and over, and I can just about make out over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. So there we go. That is this week's journal entry. I'm sorry it was a bit cryptic. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and those of you who watch on Wednesday will hear me talk more about this idea of fragments coming together to make a bigger picture. Meanwhile, thank you so much for watching, lots of love, and see you next time. Kisses too. Bye bye.